Toolbox. I am Chris Dunn. I am with Blue Hive Exhibits, and I'm so happy to have everybody join us today. Sitting in the co-host seat, I have one of my coworkers, Dana Esposito. Hey, Dana, how's it going?
Hey, Chris. So I'm Dana Esposito. I've been in the trade show industry almost 30 years now, on both the exhibit design side as well as the corporate strategy side. And today we're super excited because we have Marlys Arnold here. And Marlys, you want to tell everyone who you are and what you do?
Hi. Hi, Chris and Dana and everybody watching and listening. I'm Marlys Arnold, and I have been in the trade show world for over 2 decades now. The way I got started, I pretty much have always been an entrepreneur. And so I had my own business and I was doing exhibits at some local shows and showcasing my business. And then I also had helped to produce some expos. So pretty soon I started to observe like what people were doing, what worked, what didn't. And so just started making lists of notes. And that became, I started doing consulting and training for trade shows and exhibitors, and then used all those notes and compiled them together and wrote my first book, Build a Better Trade Show Image. And then also started hosting the Trade Show Insights podcast. And so, yeah, so just lots of tools and lots of training and working with exhibitors of all sizes and types and all different industries, everything from medical to construction to petroleum to local bridal shows. So just a little bit of everything over the years.
Wow, that's
Excellent.
that's a pretty good resume. So maybe we should flip the script and just have you interview us because you've been doing this an awful long time. That's an impressive background. So yeah, thanks so much for joining us. Like many of our guests, we've met originally on LinkedIn and start conversations. I've actually contributed a few things to some things that Marlys has done, just gaining some perspective from our standpoint. So it's wonderful that we're building this community of kind of like-minded event people, really from kind of we're really on the trade show side, but corporate events and festivals and event planners, and we're building hopefully a really great group of folks who share ideas and can learn from each other. Because at the end of the day, that's kind of what we're trying to create here on the Toolbox. So before we kind of jump into the meat and potatoes, as it were, of the conversation, we have a couple sponsors that I wanted to mention. So as we move forward, I mentioned Blue Hive. Blue Hive is a really creative, cool exhibit house. I've been there 20 years. Dana, you've been with us for a few, although your experience level takes you back several decades, as does mine. So we've got a lot of institutional knowledge here on this call for sure. Blue Hive, East Coast, West Coast. I like to think that we're kind of the right size for a lot of groups out there. We work with all sorts of different industries, different size exhibitors, everything from kind of well-funded startups up through multi-billion-dollar enterprise level corporations. So we bring a lot to the table. We're kind of in between that boutique size and some of the real big guys where you're just a number, right? We're very customer service oriented. So on the Blue Hive side, that's kind of who we are and what we do. In addition to Blue Hive as a sponsor, we also have our friends from Fist Bump. And Fist Bump is an agency, and they help us produce this content right here on the podcast. Initially, I got involved with Brandon Lee of Fist Bump and started working in a coaching program with him to uplevel mine as well as Blue Hive's social media and specifically kind of LinkedIn presence. And the more that I worked with them and the more that I learned, they really kind of were pointing us towards like, what, the podcast kind of as a platform is a great way to create content, to be a thought leader, to have these great conversations, and to be able to use all of this information that we've got coming in. We're learning, and now we're able to use that as content that we're putting out, as well as take that information and share it with our clients, because every conversation we have, we learn a little something different, which is really cool. So without further ado, I'm going to kick it back over to Dana to start with our questions, but that is just a kind of our launch pad into what's going to be an awesome conversation.
All right. So I am a planner, but when we're thinking about trade shows and exhibitors and everything they need to do, there's still a big difference between planning and also just creating proper strategy. So, Marlis, the first thing we want to dive into is like why exhibitors need a real strategy and what are some of the most common mistakes that you see from exhibitors?
Well, I always like to say hope is not a strategy. And I think too many exhibitors take what I call the field of dreams approach, where if you build it, people will automatically come to your booth. And that just, you can't count on that because it it takes too many exhibitors are trying to just check off tasks, on a to-do list. It's like we got to get our booth display ordered. We got to ship things to the show. We got to book our airfare, all those kinds of things. But they're not looking at the overall picture of what they need to be doing, how they need to be pulling this all together and having goals. And it's amazing how many exhibitors I talk to and I ask them, what are your goals? And they go, oh, we want to get a lot of leads. I'm like, okay, what is that? What is a lot? Because a lot to somebody could mean, depending on what you're selling, a lot could mean 25, a lot could mean 500, or what kinds of leads, or, are you showcasing a new product, or are you entering a new market? I mean, there's all these different kinds of layers of things that you might be doing. One of the examples that I love to share was years ago. I was doing training for a company for their national sales meeting. So all the sales reps were there. They did shows all throughout the year, but they were getting ready for their big show, the big signature show. And I asked them, I said, so what is your goal? And they're like, oh, well, we're big in this industry, in this association, everybody knows who we are. We kind of go just to stay connected with our current customers and stuff. And, I said, okay, wait a minute. You're going to spend like $250,000 to go do this show and you don't have a goal. And the sales director's in the back of the room and she's like going, oh yeah, please. Come on. Yeah, guys. And so we walked through it, we talked through it, and they set a goal. And then she contacted me after the show and said, now that they had a goal, they not only met it, they exceeded it. So, once they actually got it all into focus and they knew what they were going for and what they wanted to accomplish, there was something to work towards. It wasn't just, oh, let's show up in the booth and just hope people stop by.
As mentioned,
Nice.
hope is not a strategy, right?
Yeah.
It's like,
Yeah.
and also if you're not measuring something, or if you're not tracking something, how can you measure it, right? Just you come
Yeah.
home
How
and
do
you're
you
like, how
define
was the show?
success?
Like, it seemed
Yeah.
good. We got people were in the booth. It was all good.
Yeah, exactly.
Dana, do you have more to
Dana?
follow through on that?
I'm trying to think. I'm looking at my questions. Do you have any advice that maybe how to build a more strategic approach to that trade show participation part of strategy, like when they're thinking ahead?
Sure. Well, when I'm working with exhibitors, I teach them that there's three different parts to their exhibit, three different parts to their strategy. They've got to think about how they're going to design their exhibit, what it's going to look like. They have to think about how they're going to promote the exhibit, because like I said, just taking the field of dreams approach isn't going to cut it. And then they need to look at what their staff is going to be doing, how they need to work with them and get them up to speed. And, a lot of what I do is teach what I call the 10 commandments of booth staffing, things like, don't sit, don't eat, don't be on your phone, so stuff like that. But, they need to look at all of these pieces, and it's not only what happens at the show, it's what happens before, during, and after the show, because again, the follow-up, that's a key piece that a lot of exhibitors miss as well. So like I said, it's an umbrella strategy. There's got to be like a common thread that runs through everything of why are you doing what you're doing and how are you doing what you're doing.
Mhm.
I
Are there any?
hope,
Oh, go ahead.
I'm sorry if I could jump in. Like, I really hope that exhibitors out there are hearing this, because I think we deal with it all the time as well. And the more reinforcement that's coming from consultative professionals like ourselves to just listen, I'm not asking you to buy anything from me. All I'm saying is, like, you need to think about all of these pieces along the way. So from, on the front end, we're helping our clients design and execute an exhibit, but then we're saying, what are you doing on the front end to promote? How are you driving traffic Can we create something from a campaign? Can we take part of the design and make it into this pre-show promotionary piece? And then we're showing up and saying what's happening, in the booth itself as part of
Yep.
that strategic outreach. And we also see this with content creation, using content that's created on site. And I'm getting a little bit off track, but it's the before, the during, and the after, and then how does that play out over time? And anything that you're doing for one show can be created, repurposed to help kind of accelerate those future events too.
Exactly, exactly. And like you said, everything needs to flow together. Are you doing some kind of current campaign otherwise? Are you doing a social media campaign? Are you doing an advertising campaign in magazines or whatever? Flow all of those things together. Too many companies, I think trade shows are like a separate part. The trade show arm is not in sync, I guess you would say, with all the other marketing aspects. Trade shows are one avenue of marketing, but it's not a separate kind of marketing. It needs to be consistent. If you've got an overall campaign, use that same message in your booth. Use that same message to promote the booth. Use that same message to follow up after the booth. Have everything flowing together, present a consistent message. Don't just, and I see so often, and I'm sure you do too, Chris, as people come to you to get their booth designed, they're like, oh, we just want this booth that looks great. Or they'll come to you and say, oh, we want a booth that showcases all we could do. And they want like all these, what I call a bulletin board of like a hodgepodge of everything. And it's like, no, you need something that's like big and bold and just like, just resonates with the people walking the aisles to go, oh, I've got to go talk to that company. It looks like they have exactly what I've been looking for.
Yeah, it always surprises me, even when we've talked to, like say, marketing students, that oftentimes the trade show element of their future world isn't necessarily talked about that much in their
Mhm.
program when they're a student, and that it is oftentimes thought of as a separate thing. And one of the reasons why it surprises me, I mean, I'm immersed in this world, so I believe, why doesn't everyone know about it? But I mean, it's because it's such an expensive part of your marketing budget, right? Through the year,
Right.
and it's usually targeted to so many of their specific audiences that it just feels so important. And then when you're talking about like the before the show, at the show, and before the show, during the show, after the show, like in my brain, I'm thinking about the experience that's happening at the show. But what I want clients to think about is the experience and the message that's happening at the show starts before the show even happens. And then
Mhm.
it's still continuing on as with their follow up. That message and experience should be circling back around, so that it ties the whole thing together. And
Right.
when you're talking about like taking these messages parts for continuity, for me, the only thing that really has to change when they're communicating that message is considering the audience from show to show. Sometimes their audience changes, so you might tweak things
Mhm.
a bit for that to be absorbed for that specific audience, whether it's a demographic or a type of role that they execute, right? But other than that, like we want to help. When I say we, trade show companies want to help amplify their message, and we want consistency. Like we want everything great for them. So I completely understand what you're talking about.
Well, and you're wanting to build that memorability too. So
Yes.
the more that you reinforce the same message, the more memorable it's going to be. Because the whole thing is, yes, it's great to talk to people on the show floor and meet new people and get leads and introduce your company to new people. But the whole goal is you want to be memorable later when they go, oh, we really need to purchase, XYZ tools or whatever. It's like, oh, remember that company that we met at the show and they had a really great tool that we need, and let's call that, so you want it to be something where it's not only just that your booth looks cool and is fun or whatever. And I know we're going to talk more about that in a minute, but having a way that it's going to be really memorable. And I think the more consistent your message is, the more likely they're going to remember, because they're going to hear it over and over. They're going to hear it in the pre-show, they're going to see it in your booth, they're going to hear it in your follow-up, they're going to hear it in your social media marketing. Everything is going to be presenting that same message over and over.
Yeah. A trade show exhibit to me is essentially a playground, is an opportunity to either reinforce relationships that you already have, right? Or it's the beginning of a new relationship. So even if someone might not need you right then, it's the beginning
Mhm.
of a relationship so that you're memorable. And if something's memorable, it means they've learned it. So that when they do need you, they already feel like you have a relationship, like I already know them. And if you start to feel like you know someone, you also start to feel like you trust someone. And that's where solid long-term relationships, begin and thrive.
Exactly, exactly. And the trade show is a great way to bring your message to life. Everything else is like it's messaging online, it's messaging in print, it's messaging, through direct mail or whatever. But the trade show booth is where you bring that message to life. So looking at what is our overall message, and a lot of times I encourage exhibitors to have themes for their exhibits, and you know, having a theme to your messaging and then bringing all that together and bringing it to life in the booth makes it so much more memorable overall.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So just, I love where the conversation's going. And just to kind of put a bow on it, or at least kind of get my arms around it, is in general, right? Data shows that people in your total addressable market at any one time, your TAM, is maybe 3 to 5%. That's probably skewed when you look at it from a trade show standpoint, because people are at a show for a particular reason, right? So that number is likely higher. But anybody who's ever done a show has had conversations with folks, and they're, like, hey, we're going to do an RFP in 2026. I'm just doing research. Or 2027, 28, our contract ends in 27. We're going out to bid at that point or whatever. So even with, putting yourselves in a situation at a show, and again, this is just reinforcing what both of you guys are saying, is that, this is not a show up, take an order, sell something, and then, wipe your, wipe your hands and move on. This is building a long-term relationship, process. So
Right.
all of those things, right? Being memorable and using, engaging the senses in order to do that. So we are going to change
Well,
topics
I
slightly.
was just going to
Or
address. I see a comment in the
yes,
comments there.
yeah,
I love a theme, but it's best when the theme makes sense with the brand.
hmm,
Yes, yes. When you're going to do a theme or some kind of an overall message, it needs to make sense with your brand. It needs to make sense with what you're promoting. So you don't want to be gimmicky, but there's a lot of creative ways to come up with a theme that actually reinforces your message. If you're, I'll just try to think up a quick example of. If you're looking at trying to show how demonstrate your product is better than the competition, for example. So
hmm,
you could use a theme like, miles ahead of the competition or something, and use a racing theme, or, a lot of times people use sports themes, but again, it needs to tie in. Well, and actually, I'll let you transition to the next topic, and then I've got an I'll circle back to the sports thing when we get to the next section.
yeah, no, that sounds great. And we're going to circle back as well to just kind of how storytelling, kind of plays part in that as well. So on the toolbox here, we kind of aim for about a 40-minute type of a layout. So we're closing in on about halfway through. So we want to kind of just move things forward a little bit. And one of the topics that we definitely wanted to touch on was kind of creating interactivity within the booth space. Dana touched on it a little bit within, what are you doing to build an experience that's memorable? So when I think about, interactivity, to me, I think a tactile experience where I'm touching, or I'm engaging in something, or maybe it's a touchscreen situation where I can self-guide myself through a demonstration or participate in pieces. But Marlis, everybody's going to determine, or they're going to interpret that maybe a little bit differently. When you think interactivity, what do you think about, and how have you seen maybe different aspects of that or different versions of that play out?
Well, when I think interactivity, when I coach exhibitors to evolve and get more interactive in their booth, finding ways for people, first of all, to get interactive and engage with your product.
Mhm.
So, how can you, instead of just, even if it's software, instead of just demoing the software, have people actually walk through it themselves? If it's an actual product or a tool or something, let them actually use it and try it out. And a great way to do that is involve your product in some kind of gamification. So instead of just having, like a Plinko board or spin the wheel or something like that for gamification, involve your product. And so when I mentioned about the sports idea, one of my favorite examples is a company. They sell siding, like siding for your house,
Mhm.
and they have one of those pitching, baseball cage pitching
Yeah.
stations in their booth. But they're not just throwing the pitch to see how fast, they can pitch. They're throwing at a wall of siding. So they're demonstrating how solid their product is, how great it is, how durable it is. They're showcasing their product in that way. Other things, like I've seen a lot of like a timed race against the clock, like assembling something. If your product takes assembling, let people assemble it in the booth and
Mm.
experience that, and then award, like, fastest time of the day gets a prize or whatever. So how, thinking on how you can involve people and get them, interacting with your product. And if you don't have a product that you could do something like that, Chris, you mentioned touch screens. I've seen companies do a great job with having some kind of a quiz in their booth. And I've got an example, actually two examples, what to do and what not to do from the same show. One was a small little 10 by 10 exhibitor, and they had it was a personality quiz. And so you took the quiz and learned, like what your personality was. And then they had 4 different giveaways. So based on what your outcome in the quiz was, that was what your giveaway item was.
Mm.
Really cute, really clever. They got engagement in a 10 by 10 space, which a lot of times that's what I hear from exhibitors is, oh, our booth is too small. We can't do an engagement. We can't do an activity. Yes, you can. But then the second one, again, same show, big household name exhibitor. They had like a big, great big touch screen panel. And I walked up. Now, granted, it could have just been, it was late in the day. Maybe nobody came over, but nobody talked to me the whole time. I just went through the quiz.
Mm.
And then when it popped up at the end, I got my phone out to take a picture of the screen, the final screen that told me my answer. It was gone in a flash. I didn't even have time to read it.
Ah.
And there was no place for me to enter my contact information. So not only did they not capture my information, they never sent me anything after. So, I didn't get a recap of here's what your quiz said and here's how we want to follow up. Nothing. And I was like, what a waste. Yeah, you had this big, beautiful touch screen and people were engaging with it, but you got nothing out of it.
Yeah, yeah, failure to actually, capture that. Hey, I wanted to hit on one of these questions. So James kind of asked a little bit ago about stories. So, people do remember stories. It's a great way to communicate. How have we seen planners incorporate storytelling in their exhibits? I think this is really kind of plays into what we're talking about very well. Because sometimes it will lean on the interactive piece, and other
Mhm.
times the storytelling takes place in other ways. But anybody want to, whether it's Dana or Marlys on that, just kind of talk about an example that where the storytelling really kind of played out and made a lot of sense?
Marla, you want to go first?
Oh, well, go ahead. If you've got an example, go ahead, Dana.
Well, I have a couple examples, but I'll keep it short. So, first of all, I think storytelling is one of the most important forms of communication ever. Because if you're trying to tell someone or teach somebody something, if they can put it into some sort of something they can relate to, right? And that's what the
Mhm.
story is. It becomes something that they again will remember. And a perfect example of this has nothing to do with exhibits. It was 7th grade, and I had a science teacher, and I just thought he was the best teacher because I didn't have to try to learn anything. All I had to do was listen because he told everything in a story, and it was just his way of teaching, and made it memorable. It made it entertaining and memorable. So then
Mhm.
I was educated and it stayed with me. Um, and the way that we can translate that into exhibiting is whatever that theme is or whatever the message is, if you can put that into story form that is
Mhm.
entertaining, you're going to amplify the opportunity for it to be remembered. So that's my most favorite way of communicating something is in the form of a story. It's essentially an example because people can put themselves into the situation, and if they can put themselves in the
Mm.
situation and they understand like the why behind something, it goes from being like a headline to understanding, because they see it in context, and it becomes something that is they can relate to and remember.
Right. Right. And, exactly. People, when you're telling them, when you're crafting the story, and it goes back to the whole idea of strategy and designing what you're going to do before, during, and after the show, figuring out what your story is, what your theme is, what your message is, and crafting everything so that it reinforces all of that, so you're kind of setting people up and teasing them ahead of time with those pre-show promotions, teasing them what the story is and what they're going to experience in your booth. And then when they come to the booth, then the story comes to life. And then afterwards, then you're reinforcing the story in your follow-up, and incorporating and weaving the people that you've met, that you met in the booth, weaving them into that story and letting them see how your product or your service can help make, create their story, write their story.
Mhm. One really good example, and I've seen this done several times by different companies because it's just a great tool, is say you're trying to communicate a particular new drug and its efficacy, or a medical device, right? Oftentimes you're trying to communicate to doctors, right? Well, a doctor isn't typically the patient. So what you're trying to do, you're not just trying to say, like, here on this wall or this touchscreen is why this drug is better, right? There was an exhibit where the drug was actually for MS. So what they had the experience is, when the doctors would come in, is the doctor would become the patient,
Mm-hmm.
and they literally, one of the interactives was they walking down this path, but they were only allowed to say take steps. The flow would light up when they were allowed to take the next step. And essentially what would happen is the doctor would be walking at the pace with someone with like advanced MS who was still able to be, mobile on foot. And so it really slowed the doctor down. And what can be quite frustrating, because you're just trying to walk in a
Mm-hmm.
line, nothing should be holding you back. So right there, that in its simplest form was a doctor could empathize with the patient, going, well, this stinks. Like, I'm going
Yeah.
from here to there. Why is this taking me so long? So it's showing that this drug can actually slow the progression of that disease, right? The
Mm-hmm.
doctor was empathetic. There was a journey, there was a story. So when they walked out of there, they didn't have just the data, which is super important.
Exactly.
And they had more of in context.
Yeah. Well, and I actually, one of my clients did that, and her arena was autism. And so she created an experience, again, 10 by 10 space, little tiny exhibitor, but she created an experience in her booth where she had a video that they watched and they had headphones on. So they were listening and experiencing what it was like to be autistic, and how the world, how an autistic person perceives the world. She had the doctors were leaving, going and get somebody else and bringing them back and going, you've got to watch this. And she, again, another example, she blew her goals out of the water because she made it experiential, multisensory. People remembered that, and it really brought her message to life. So like I said, it doesn't take a ginormous budget. It doesn't take a mega booth. You can do this in a 10 by 10 or 10 by 20 foot space as well. It just takes, again, strategy and thinking it all through,
Mhm.
and not just checking boxes.
It reminds me of, ever experienced something. It could be just a movie. It could be you went to a movie and it was like earth shattering. It was amazing. And you go home and you're like, oh my God, you got to go to this movie. It was so, and everyone just kind of looks at you like, yeah, okay, I'm sure it was great. And then like next week they go to this movie and they come back and I'm like, oh my God, that was amazing. You got like, I know, I told you that. Right. You can tell another human something all day long. You can tell
Yeah.
them ad
Yeah.
nauseum. You can tell, like, you can talk till you blue in the face. If someone sees it for themselves or experiences it themselves, all the difference in the world. So I'd almost say, like, stop trying to tell people and just give them the opportunity to experience it, and let the experience do all the heavy lifting.
Yeah.
Exactly what Zadie is saying in the comments as well. So I mean, listen, storytelling is baked into our DNA, right? This is how
Mm-hmm.
everything that we have learned as humans was passed down. It's only up until very recent that everything has become much more transcribed and so forth. And granted, language has existed for a long time, written language has existed for a little less. Um, but this is how we did it, right around the campfire after the big, buffalo slaying. The story, the stories of how everything went.
Yeah.
To
Well, and it's interesting because you say that a lot of times that's what I have, a lot of times it's the show organizer or, like I said, the director of sales that'll hire me to come in and train for all their exhibitors.
mm,
And a lot of times they'll come up to me afterwards and they go, "You told them all the same stuff that I've always told them." But it's like suddenly they get it, because I made it real and it wasn't just like talking at them, but I was giving them, like we just did, going through examples and talking about and brainstorming, how can we actually do this for your company? And all of a sudden the light bulb comes on. It's like, I get it now. I can see how this actually will work. So it's such a fun process when you get into it and you really start brainstorming and you think about how can we do this? How can we bring our message to life? And I mean, this is what I love. This is what I've been doing for over 2 decades now. And I love coming up with these fun ideas for exhibitors.
yeah. And the same works for kids as well. Basically, the parents tell them all day long about this and
Yeah.
that, and they don't listen until they bring in a third party who tells it a little differently. And the kids, oh my God, it makes sense now.
Yeah.
Not that I would know, or my kids are perfect. That doesn't happen to them. So, of course. Dana, you were going to talk a little bit about partnering with show organizers.
Yes. So, what can you talk to us about? Show organizers are oftentimes, they're an untapped resource for planners, and just some other things that trade show managers can really think about when it comes to dealing with and partnering with the organizers.
Well, and again, this is a lesson I learned early on as an exhibitor because, sometimes I would just because I'm a solopreneur. I was really wanting to maximize my results and really focused on what can I do to make this really, this show really work for me. And so I would go to the show organizer and I would say, what other kinds of opportunities do you have? What other kinds of promotions, what else can I be doing? And sometimes I would find out about things. Sometimes they were even free opportunities and I would take advantage of them. And other exhibitors didn't just because they didn't ask or didn't bother to check.
Mm.
One of the things that really I don't get why every exhibitor doesn't take advantage of, at least fill out your exhibitor profile. I mean, that's one of those no-brainer things. It should be quick, simple, should only take you about 5 minutes. These days, most shows have the ability, you can embed a PDF in there, you can add a video, all these different elements. But as I scroll through the list of exhibitors at any given show, like in the app or whatever, and I see all the ones that still have the show's logo on them, I'm like, well, I know they didn't bother to fill anything out. I mean, at the
Yeah.
very minimum, do a brief description, add your link to your website, all that kind of stuff. Do whatever you can in this this exhibitor profile to, help give you added visibility. You can even promote if you're doing something cool in your booth, if you're having some kind of a contest or experience, have that, promote that in your exhibitor profile as well. So that's one thing. Another thing is speaking opportunities. I was just consulting with an exhibitor recently and he was telling me he wasn't sure he was going to go back to this one show. He has a service business, so he doesn't have like product to display. He has a small booth and he felt like that, he just wasn't getting people in his booth and he wasn't getting his message out there. And I said, why don't you propose a session, an educational session? You can teach about what it is that you do. Obviously you have to be careful not to turn into a pitch fest, but,
Yeah.
propose a session, maybe bring in a client, do a co-presenting with a client and talking about how, how this all works or what they need to be thinking about or whatever. And then and then you're going to teach this session and then people are going to come into your booth afterwards. I've seen that happen with a lot of exhibitors as well. They teach a session and then people come rushing to their booth afterwards and they're like, oh, we were in your session and we want to learn more about this. And, that's that added level of visibility that puts you ahead of all your competition, not only your competition, but all the competition on the show floor.
Is
Yeah.
there anything else that exhibitors can do to build stronger relationships with show organizers?
Well, I think just reaching out to them, and since I come from a background of, I've been on the exhibit side, I've been on the show organizer side. So I always kind of try to build that bridge between the two, because it should
Mm.
be a partnership. It should be teamwork, until exhibitors and show organizers are all working together. They all have the same goal in the end. The show organizer wants the show to be successful. They want all their exhibitors to be successful. And so, by everybody working together and, promoting the show, I talked about earlier that, it's important to promote beforehand. I learned that early on too. That's not just up to the show to promote. When I promoted my own booth, I got people in. I got people coming in saying, "Thank you. I would not have known about this event if you hadn't invited me." So promoting it, taking responsibility, teaming up, looking at what, most shows have on their website. They'll have, a whole list of, these are all the promotional opportunities. Now, yeah, some of them you have to pay for, but, look at what these opportunities are and how you can get involved.
So are those a lot of those things you're talking about, sessions and promotion? Is there anything else that you would offer as insight to help align booth goals with like show level programming?
Well, again, by having that conversation with the show organizer and asking them, what, or looking at what's the theme of the overall show, because a lot of shows change their theme from one year to the next. How can you do something in your exhibit that reinforces that theme or reinforces that message? Or if it's an association show, what can you be doing to help, show your support for the association and tying that message together? So there's a lot of different ways to do it. But again, it goes back to having strategy,
Hmm.
and not just checking to-do list boxes.
Yeah. All right, I'm going to bounce us to one of our last sections because we're getting close to wrap up time. So, Marlys, can you give us, our audience, 3 actionable ideas for exhibitors to implement at their next show?
Sure. And these are the 3 things that I have built my entire career around, and these are 3 things that I teach exhibitors all the time. The first one is, you need to design your booth to be engaging and, like we talked about, interactive and then memorable, because you want your booth to be something that draws people in, gets them involved, and most of all, like we said, help them remember your company and your product or service afterwards, when the time comes for them to make a buying decision ultimately. The second thing is, you want to promote ahead of time. I always tell exhibitors that if you exhibit without doing any pre-show promotions, it's like throwing a party and neglecting to send any invitations. So you want to make sure that you're getting the word out there. Like we talked about before, you don't want to be the field of dreams and just hoping that people will magically discover you. You want to actually invite them to come to your booth and give them a reason of why they want to come.
Right. Right.
And then the third thing is, you want to educate your booth staff so that they know what to do and what not to do in the booth. Make sure that they're representing your company in the right way, and that they know that and understand the message and the goals that you're trying to accomplish, and so that they can convey that all in a professional manner. But also how to follow up afterwards. And I know we're not going to get into that today, but that's another key part too, of making sure that that things don't end when the show closes. That's just the end of phase 1. And then you move into the follow-up stage. But those are what that's the framework of my book, Build a Better Trade Show Image. That is the framework of all of my exhibitor workshops that I teach. That's, it's those 3 things: design, promote, and make sure your staff is doing what they're supposed to be doing.
Those are 3 really strong pillars, Marlys. That's awesome stuff. And you know what? So we're here in I don't know, episode 22. I feel like the training of the folks involved is something that we come back to over and over again. That's a big hole that people aren't hitting really well.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's something that it's not that I always say it's not rocket science, but it's also something that so many people overlook. So it is really key to have that all those layers of education.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. Hey, let's take an opportunity to do a little shameless self-promotion of your books. I think you've got a copy or two kicking around, don't you?
I do. I do. I wrote my first book, Build a Better Trade Show Image. Like I said, that was the how-to guide I wish I would have had as a new exhibitor. I basically walked through everything from what to do before, during, and after, and giving people a complete framework. I use the reason I call it Build a Better Trade Show Image. I use the framework of building a house. So it's like, we start with the foundation and then we put the walls up. And so I walk through the whole process comparing of how you need to do the same when you're building your trade show strategy. And then I republished that one with the second edition a couple of years ago, which now is an award-winning book. Last fall, I won the Best Indie Book Award
Oh,
for
that's
Build a
awesome.
Better Trade Show Image Volume 2 or Edition number 2. So that was pretty cool. And then my other book is Exhibit Design That Works, and that one is focused just on the design portion of what to think about. We talked a lot about strategy. What's the strategy? What should your booth look like? What kinds of multi-sensory elements can you add? All of those kinds of things. And then, of course, my podcast, Trade Show Insights. Chris, you and I have talked a lot about that lately. I was one of the original
OG.
podcasters. Yeah. I started in April of 2006. My very first episode was actually a review of the exhibitor show. So I had just been to an exhibitor show and I did a recap of that. That was my first episode. And so, back then, most people didn't even know what podcasts were.
I know you were a true, true original on that, innovator, as it were.
Yeah.
So I feel like,
and believe me, it's a lot easier now than it was. It was a lot more complicated to do.
I can imagine. Well, you didn't have fist bump to help you run everything, do all the heavy lifting. That's for sure. Cool stuff. So, hey, Marlys, what is the best way for people to get a hold of you? Because after you've just dropped all these gold nuggets, I'm sure lots of folks are going to want to try to figure out how to find you and engage and ask some more questions.
Sure. Well, thanks, Chris. I actually a good way to reach me if you're on LinkedIn. I'm all over LinkedIn, so you can reach out to me there. And my websites, I have tradeshowinsights.com. Just posted a brand new episode yesterday. So that's where to find the blog and podcast. And then my other website is exhibitmarketerscafé.com. And that's where I have information about all my consulting and training and tools that I provide for both exhibitors and show organizers. And James, I see you're asking, am I on Goodreads? Yes, I'm in Goodreads. My book is Amazon, bookshop.org, all those good places. So
great. All right. Are your books on audio version or just?
I have not yet done an audio. It's something I would like to do, but sometimes there's just not enough hours in the day.
The cobbler's kids never have any shoes, right? As it were.
I'm a huge audio person. If you end up doing them, let me know because I'd love to. I listen while I drive all the time, so that would be wonderful.
Yeah, it's definitely on my list of things to do, but we'll see. Stay tuned.
Absolutely. And Zadia and Sejal both agree that when picking the folks who are going to man your booth, salespeople should not be the only automatically selected folks that are there. You really need to look at what are the strong suits of all of your people and make sure you're building a team that makes sense, right? Not only, sales folks tend to, paint with a broad brush. We tend to be fairly outgoing, right? But we're not detailed people. We probably aren't really technical people, right? So you got to have the whole gamut, right, to fill that field of players really well.
I actually have done some blog posts and podcasts on that. So if you go to tradeshowinsights.com, you can do a search for sales and you should be able to bring all those up. But yeah, I've got some thoughts on that.
There you go. It sounds like some definitive thoughts. As a salesperson, I may or may not go and read that because I don't know what I'll see. Awesome. Well, this has been a wonderful conversation. Appreciate you guys filling in. There was a couple areas where I needed to switch off my microphone. I have some work going on in my house here, and real life kind of sets in. My normal office was not available, and the contractors are moving around. But we made it relatively seamless here today, so this is all good. Do appreciate it. Dana, thanks for joining me as the co-host, and Marlys, thank you for joining us as our special guest. This has been a tremendous conversation, and I look forward to to, I think, sharing this episode with lots of folks. Obviously, here we are on our live broadcast. Literally, as soon as we end it, it becomes available as a recorded piece. You can come back to it and listen to it and watch us over and over again. And then we're also gonna have the episode shows up on our YouTube channel, and we're also across the board on all of the different podcast platforms as well. So I'm a Spotify guy. I listen to a lot of podcasts, and every once in a while, my own podcast comes up, and I get to listen to myself and go, "Ooh, I wish I didn't say that," or "I can do better." Awesome. So thank you so much. I appreciate everybody tuning in, being part of our Event Marketers Toolbox community. Marlys, thanks so much for joining us. I hope you had a good time.
Yeah, thanks, Chris and Dana. This was fun. And thanks to everybody for joining in and listening. And we'll see you around online.
Absolutely. Thanks, everybody. Take care. Have a great day.